The air stank of scorched metal and meat. The stars above Colony E7, Mira, were veiled by drifting ash, turning the sky into a gray, swirling smear. Buildings stood like tombstones, silent, jagged, skeletal. Not a single voice remained. No children. No mothers. No screams. Until now, no one had survived the Xarneth Reapers. Staff Sergeant Alex Rourke crouched behind a shattered transport engine, eyes scanning the distant corridor ahead, rifle tight against his shoulder. His breath was steady. Too steady. He'd seen war, bled in backwater moons, and watched squads vanish in the span of a heartbeat. But this was something else. He tapped his comm, no signal, no response, just the whispering static of the dead. The dropship had left an hour ago. No evac until he confirmed total loss. Intel Command didn't believe in wasting fuel on ghosts. They sent Rourke alone, not for rescue, but to verify extinction. And if anything still crawled here, he was ordered to gather data before pulling the trigger. Dust shifted beneath his boot as he moved forward through the twisted ruins of the colony's central courtyard. Lights flickered weakly overhead, casting long, jittering shadows across blood-stained walls. Handprints, burn marks, deep gouges in titanium. Rourke knelt beside one of the bodies, a civilian, female, maybe late 30s. Her face was gone, not eaten, extracted. The Xarneth didn't devour for hunger. They peeled minds like onions, took what they needed, left nothing but meat. The Reapers were never seen until it was too late. No one really knew what they looked like, only shapes caught in surveillance feeds, blurs of movement, the flicker of black limbs and glowing veins. One frame showed a mouth too wide, no jaw, just muscle and thorns. Another showed hands with too many fingers, knuckles bending the wrong way. But Rourke didn't care what they looked like. He cared about how they died. He slid around a corridor corner, pressed flat against the wall, and froze. Something was breathing ahead. Soft, rhythmic. Too controlled to be mechanical, too alien to be human. He edged forward, rifle raised, and saw it. A Reaper. Maybe a scout. Maybe a straggler. It was hunched over a corpse, long appendages twitching as if reading the dead man's final thoughts through tactile memory. Its skin pulsed with dim bioluminescence, patterns flickering across its torso in a language that wasn't meant to be understood. Rourke didn't hesitate. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. 3 suppressed rounds. The round sparked on impact, but the Reaper didn't fall. It twitched, whirled, and in a blur was gone, vanished down the hall like vapor. The corpse slumped over, and the silence returned, heavier now. Armor-piercing rounds ineffective, he muttered into his wrist recorder. Minimal reaction to trauma. Target highly mobile. Confirmed presence of active Reaper unit. He didn't chase it. Chasing a predator into its domain was suicide. Instead, he backtracked, ducked into a half-collapsed maintenance room, and set down his pack. From within, he pulled out an ancient tool, something his grandfather used during a war on Earth. A combat knife, perfectly balanced, carbon black. No tech, no noise, just steel. The colony schematics flashed in his neural HUD, overlaid in green. There were choke points, narrow ventilation ducts, furnace lines, power grid conduits, all perfect hunting grounds for him. The mission had changed. He wasn't verifying anything anymore. He was going to see if the stories were true, if the Xarneth really left no survivors. He found a console with power. It flickered, but he forced it into life. Surveillance feeds crawled up the screen. Most were static, but one feed from a security turret outside the medbay showed movement. 2 Reapers, gliding, barely touching the ground, heads turning as if sniffing the air. They were looking for him now. Rourke smiled faintly. He locked the feed and downloaded the last few minutes of footage. The timestamp showed it had been 5 minutes since the scout saw him, meaning they were close. Too close. He moved, fast and silent, back into the corridors, placing tripwire explosives, motion-triggered flares, and sonic displacers. Low-tech, dirty, but that's what worked. The Reapers devoured data. They learned patterns, but they couldn't adapt to chaos. They couldn't predict a man who didn't follow rules. As he passed another corpse, he paused. A child. Frozen mid-run. burned to the bone from the chest outward. Whatever hit her had started inside. He knelt, eyes cold. "This isn't revenge," he murmured. "This is control. This is extermination." He left a grenade in her pocket, set to proximity trigger. The lights above him buzzed once, then went black. Motion sensors flared red in his HUD. Rear corridor. 40 meters. He turned, back pressed to the wall. There was no sound, just a faint click of something walking without feet. It passed by him, a blur in the dark, heatless, invisible to the naked eye. But his knife was real. As it neared, he moved in a single breath, spinning, slicing, driving the blade through its pulsing midsection. It shrieked without making noise, its body spasming as tendrils curled around his arm. He kicked back, rolled, then dove through a maintenance hatch just as his tripwire flared. The explosion ripped the hallway behind him apart. Concrete rained down. Metal groaned. No victory cry. No celebration. Just another heartbeat survived. Rourke checked his arm. Blood. Not deep. He felt worse from training knives. But the Reaper's touch had burned. His skin itched where the thing's limbs had coiled. He injected a counteragent. Unknown venom. Better to risk overdosing than let it spread. He slumped against the wall, catching his breath. "I've got your attention now," he whispered. "Good." He recorded a short data log, tagging his location and encounter. No survivors reported until now. "I've engaged hostiles. Confirm Reaper presence. Request remote recon drone. Airburst clearance if unable to extract. But I'm not done yet." A low hum filled the hall. Not mechanical. Not wind. A frequency that made his teeth hurt. They were coming for him now. All of them. Rourke rose to his feet, knife in one hand, rifle in the other. He wasn't a scientist. Not a diplomat. Not a priest. He was a soldier. And he'd just become the first human the Xarneth failed to kill. Ash drifted in slow spirals through the collapsed atrium of the medical wing. Rourke crouched in the shadows of a half-buried cryopod, watching the distant corridor. He hadn't slept. His muscles ached from tension, but his mind stayed razor-sharp. Fatigue could be fatal here. The Reapers weren't just killers. They were hunters, relentless, patient, intelligent. But now, for the first time, something had shifted. They were uncertain. The moment he drove steel into one of them and lived, bled, but lived, he had rewritten the equation. And whatever passed for their hive mind was struggling to recalculate. He studied the remains of the Reaper he'd killed. What was left after the explosion wasn't much. Shredded blackened flesh, coils of biosynthetic tendons, fragments of chitinous plating, and a stench that clung to the inside of his lungs. Most revealing was the neural cluster he'd pried loose. A pulsating orb the size of his fist, humming weakly. Rourke connected it to a portable decryption module and watched the results unfold. The Reaper's memory held the last 15 minutes of its awareness. Rourke saw himself, seen through the alien's perspective, filtered through heat, sound, and electrical resonance. It cataloged him like a threat profile, highlighting movement vectors, recoil timing, and acoustic range. But one detail stood out. The memory looped at the moment of the knife strike. It repeated the frame over and over again, the point of failure. They didn't understand why he'd attacked the way he did. They were learning, adapting, fast. That made things harder. Rourke closed the display and crushed the orb beneath his boot. No point in giving them more. The map in his HUD shifted, showing a structural anomaly in the colony's geothermal maintenance level. An area not mapped in public schematics. A dead zone for Reaper scans. Possibly overlooked. Possibly a trap. But maybe, just maybe, the best place to strike from. He marked the path and began moving. Every hallway had become a chessboard. Every corner a kill zone. Rourke's traps had bought him time, but the Reapers were evolving. They no longer followed straight paths. They broke patterns. They moved in teams of 2 instead of 3. One always hung back. The next encounter wouldn't be a surprise. He passed another corridor. A security drone had been eviscerated, its casing peeled open like fruit, wiring dripping out in metallic entrails. The Reapers didn't just kill to eliminate. They killed to understand. They learned everything their prey touched. But human unpredictability? That was harder to mimic. He placed a sensor node beneath a busted floor panel. If they followed, he'd know. Descending into the substructure was like falling into a lung. The walls pulsed with heat from the old reactors. Pipes hissed steam. The lighting was ancient, yellowed, flickering tubes that swung on torn supports. It felt forgotten. No signs of violence. No bodies. Just neglect. He moved quietly, listening for any unnatural rhythm in the background noise. Nothing yet. In a small control room, half buried in dust, he found what he needed. A functioning surveillance array, likely missed during the colony's fall. The camera still worked, albeit sluggishly. He brought up feeds from multiple sectors, watching the Reapers move. There were at least 4 left. He'd killed one. The remaining units weren't wandering aimlessly. They were searching. One paused near the med bay, tilting its head as if sniffing the echoes of his footsteps. Another passed through a ruined cafeteria and paused at a burnt message scrawled on the wall. We prayed. Nothing came. He watched as the Reaper stared at the writing. No reaction. Then it turned sharply and sprinted toward a ventilation shaft. They'd found his trail again. Rourke pulled up the environmental controls. He couldn't kill them here. Not yet. But he could corral them. With a few commands, he rerouted heat exhaust into the upper corridors. The temperature would spike suddenly, enough to disorient and push them toward the sublevels. He didn't expect it to last long. Maybe 10 minutes before they adapted. But 10 minutes was all he needed. He moved quickly, setting traps deeper in the substructure. Pressure charges, arc mines, and localized EMP bursts. Each was buried in unexpected places, inside crushed helmets, beneath collapsed stretchers, inside vent shafts. Improvised, dirty, unpredictable. Human. He paused only once, to catch his breath in a forgotten chapel. The small room was silent, dark, lit only by the dull glow of emergency lighting strips. Dust coated everything, and the altar had been broken in two, the symbols scorched away. A child's doll lay nearby, untouched. He stared at it for a long time. This wasn't a war, he said softly, voice echoing in the emptiness. It was a culling. He didn't know who he was talking to. Himself, maybe, or the dead. Then he heard it. A click, too soft for human ears. But his implant caught it. A Reaper had entered the sublevels. He shut everything off. HUD, lights, even his own breathing pattern slowed. Every muscle coiled. Another sound, closer now. Liquid sliding over metal. They moved like serpents, their limbs adapting to terrain. No fixed shape. He pressed himself into a crevice behind a supply crate, watching the corridor. A shadow passed, too large to be one Reaper. This one was different. It paused as if tasting the air. Its head turned sharply toward the chapel. Then it moved on. Rourke didn't move. Not yet. He counted to 60, then to 60 again. Only when he was sure it had passed did he emerge. He moved in the opposite direction, careful to trigger a flare behind him, mimicking a false retreat. A soft burst of light filled the hall and vanished. The Reaper would chase it. Rourke slipped deeper into the machinery under the colony's heart. He reached the final chamber. The old geothermal core lay dead and cracked. But its casing remained, a coffin of shielding, thick enough to mask even Reaper senses. He set up his temporary command post there, taped a photo of his squad, Unit 9, laughing before their last deployment, on the wall. Then he sat down and waited. He didn't believe in heroes. Heroes were dead, but he believed in setting traps, in making monsters bleed. He believed in sending a message. For the first time since landing, he let himself rest. Briefly, the Reapers would come soon, and he'd be ready. His last thought before the lights flickered again was simple, cold, and sharp. Let's see what learns faster. A machine bred to kill, or a human too stubborn to die. The first detonation shook the foundation like a thunderclap trapped underground. Dust cascaded from the cracked ceiling of the geothermal core chamber as the vibration echoed through the substructure. Rourke didn't flinch. He was already on the move. He had rigged the entire route to the chamber like a maze of death, mapped their behavior, anticipated their pathfinding logic, and laced every choke point with murder. The Reapers thought in straight lines and wide arcs, but he thought in fractures and fire. Motion pinged in his HUD. The secondary corridor tripped 3 infrared nodes. They were here. Rourke grabbed the detonator in his left hand and slid the blade into the sheath strapped to his back. His rifle was prepped, barrel still warm from earlier testing. His heart thudded once. That was enough. He pressed the first trigger. A pressure mine disguised as a collapsed ceiling beam exploded upward, sending rebar and ceramic shards slicing into the first Reaper unit. He watched on the camera feed as the creature recoiled, limbs flailing, its torso peeling like wet bark. It didn't scream, it kind of know how, but stumbled off balance, confused. That was what mattered. He pressed the second. The sublevel ducts ignited in a line of plasma fire, rolling through the shaft like a living sun. Another Reaper unit, faster than the first, evaded the worst of it, but its outer skin boiled, sloughing off in strips. Still, it came on. Rourke slid down a narrow vent and landed behind the old energy conduit. His traps were holding, but barely. They were adapting even faster now, using staggered movement, pausing between pulses to avoid trip sensors. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a war. He switched to his sidearm and crept through the collapsed engineer's barracks. Every step was measured, silent. The air here was thick with heat and the coppery sting of blood, both human and alien. A Reaper moved past the broken doorway ahead, scanning the room with slow, pulsing waves of sound. He could see the distortion with his naked eye now, the pressure shimmer like heat off pavement. Rourke knew better than to move. The creature lingered, then moved on. He waited 6 full seconds. Then he followed. Through the dim red emergency lights, he crept closer, tracking its pattern. It walked with a limp, damage from the blast. Good. He slid the knife out, adjusted his grip, and timed his approach with precision only someone trained in silence could master. 1 second. 2. He lunged. The knife drove up between the segmented plating under its arm, not stabbing, twisting, until something gave way. The Reaper's body jerked violently, claws flailing, scraping across his shoulder. Sparks burst from its wound. He shoved the creature into the wall, pinned it, and tore the blade free with a sickening rip. Its body convulsed, then fell still. He stepped back, panting. Blood seeped through his shirt, the claw marks deep, but not fatal. He'd been hit worse in training. The difference was, in training, the enemies didn't radiate heat like furnaces or smell like chemicals and bone rot. No time to rest. The next wave was coming. He sprinted toward the fallback corridor and past the final trap. 2 canisters of pressurized hydrogen fused to a cryo chamber's emergency release. He had no illusions about whether it would kill them, but it would buy him seconds. Seconds were gold. Behind him, a roar of shattering glass and venting gas signaled detonation. He reached the lower rail transit, an abandoned tunnel running beneath the colony's main artery. The perfect funnel. He'd baited them here on purpose, retreating into the narrowest place he could find. Less room for them to move. More room for him to make every bullet count. The lights above flickered as power surged. Something in the alien tech was disrupting systems. He didn't care. Darkness was his friend now. A shadow dropped from the ceiling as he moved. He ducked instinctively, and a Reaper landed where his head had been, slashing its claw through empty air. It moved fast, faster than the others. Maybe this one had learned more. Maybe it remembered how he fought. He fired point blank. The impact staggered it. Not dead, not even wounded, just paused. He dropped the rifle, grabbed the Reaper's wrist, and drove his head into its chest. Once, twice, until the plating cracked. Then he drew his sidearm and fired through the gap. The creature folded, collapsing over him, twitching. He shoved it off and rolled away, breath ragged. A tremor hit the tunnel. The others were catching up. He could hear the metallic skittering of claws on steel, the scrape of limbs dragging over walls. One of them screeched, a sound not from vocal cords, but from internal vibrations. A warning, a challenge. He welcomed it. He limped toward the emergency generator junction and grabbed the last 2 arc charges from his belt. He jammed them into the sidewall, set on remote. Then he stood in the middle of the tunnel and waited. 2 Reapers came into view. One tall, its frame patchworked with previous injuries. the other smaller, sleeker, twitching with overclocked aggression. They saw him and charged. Rourke held until they crossed the threshold. Then he detonated the charges. Electricity surged through the tunnel. The arc coils lit up like firestorms, blasting pure voltage in sheets of blue and white. The Reapers shrieked, flesh boiling, limbs convulsing in midair. One collapsed immediately. The other, scorched and stumbling, came on. He raised his sidearm. Empty. No time to reload. So he drew the knife again. It lunged. He didn't move. Instead, he dropped to one knee and let the creature soar past. Then he turned and slammed the blade into the back of its neck, between two vertebrae, deep into the neural stem. It twitched, spasmed, then dropped. The tunnel fell silent. Rourke slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Blood ran down his arm. His ribs ached. The air stank of ozone and death. He'd killed 3 more. Only one remained. The Alpha. He stood slowly, wiped the blood from his eyes, and took stock. Supplies low. Ammo down to 6 rounds. Knife chipped. 1 charge left. But he was alive. The Alpha would come soon. Not with rage. Not with panic. It would come with calculation. He pulled out the cracked photo of Unit 9 and stared at the faces. They weren't coming back. None of them. But he was still here. Still bleeding. Still fighting. He stuffed the photo back into his pocket and walked toward the surface shaft. The final round was waiting. And so was he. The storm above the colony had cleared. Smoke curled in the upper atmosphere, painting the dying sky in shades of bruised gray and dim orange. What little light filtered through revealed a landscape torn to bone and steel, a colony reduced to open wounds and silence. But beneath the shattered spires and twisted corridors, one man still moved. Rourke climbed slowly. Each step up the surface shaft was a reminder that he hadn't died yet. His legs burned, ribs cracked with every breath, and blood soaked through the fabric of his torn uniform. The tunnel narrowed, then opened into what was once the colony's central observation platform. Its dome had been blown out by the first Reaper assault. Wind swept through jagged glass teeth. Broken stars glimmered above. He knelt behind an overturned console and checked his final charge, small, but enough to blind. Enough to finish what he'd started. He had 1 round left in the sidearm. That would have to be enough. A cold hum filled the air, and the pressure in his chest changed. The Alpha had arrived. It didn't enter like the others. It unfolded. Rourke heard it before he saw it. Soundless at first, like gravity shifting sideways, like thought given shape. Then it stepped through the open breach, limbs folding outward, height growing with each pulse. 8 feet tall, plated in matte obsidian, its form shifted in and out of visible spectrum, armor laced with thin lines of burning red. Its face was featureless except for a soft indentation that moved with breath. Or calculation. This one was different. Smarter. Older. Maybe it had killed more than the others combined. Maybe it remembered entire civilizations ending in its presence. Rourke didn't flinch. He'd killed its kin, and he didn't need to win. He just needed to send a message. The Alpha stood at the far end of the dome, unmoving. Rourke rose slowly, knife in one hand, pistol in the other. He didn't bother speaking. Nothing he could say would matter to it. Words were for people. This thing only understood what it could dismantle. It stepped forward. He raised the pistol and fired. The bullet struck its chest, sparked, and fell. The Alpha didn't stop. Rourke dropped the pistol and sprinted sideways, sliding behind the ruined remains of the comms console. The creature moved faster than physics allowed. Its limbs didn't move so much as blur, each step reverberating in the ground like thunder beneath flesh. He ducked just as a whip-like appendage sliced through where his head had been, carving stone like paper. He rolled, came up under its reach, and drove the knife up. It caught his wrist mid-motion. Pain surged as the bones in his forearm cracked. The Alpha stared at him, expressionless. Then it spoke, not with sound, but through a vibrating pressure in his skull. "You are aberration." Rourke spat blood in its face. Its grip tightened, crushing. But in that moment, as it leaned in, he triggered the final charge, wired to the combat knife's hilt. The explosion was small, just enough to stagger. The blast tore through the Reaper's arm, flinging them both backward. Rourke hit the floor hard, rolled, and came up with his backup blade, serrated, ugly, meant for tearing, not stabbing. The Alpha was on one knee, partially disarmed but recovering fast. Its plating had cracked along its side, leaking thick black fluid that hissed on contact with the air. It turned its head toward him again, slower now. Curious. Why do you persist? The voice pressed again. Rourke didn't answer. He lunged. They collided violently. It struck him with its remaining arm, slamming him into a wall. The wind left his lungs in a sickening gasp. He stabbed blindly, the blade catching the exposed wiring near its ribs. Sparks flew. It shrieked, not in pain, but interference. It struck again, and everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was on the floor, limbs trembling. The Reaper was above him, leaking but not dead. Not yet. It reached down. He grabbed a broken metal rod nearby and jammed it through its side. The creature seized, spasmed, and collapsed beside him, twitching. Rourke pulled himself free, crawling away, gasping for air. Then silence. Just breathing. His. Theirs. After a minute, only his. He lay there for a long time, unable to move. Then he crawled back to the main relay. The colony's beacon was shattered, but the uplink core was still intact. He hardwired his neural implant into the interface, bypassed the damaged security, and forced a link to any nearby listening stations. Static, then faint return. He activated the recorder. Staff Sergeant Alex Rourke. Colony E7. Mira declared lost. Confirmed presence of Xarneth Reaper strike force. 6 units engaged. All neutralized. He paused, coughing blood into his palm. Then continued. Human losses, total. 1 survivor. 1 resistance. He transmitted the video logs, combat footage, thermal scans, kill counts. Proof. Then he looked into the cracked lens. They're not invincible. They can bleed. They can fall. You just have to stop being afraid. He cut the link and collapsed back against the wall. The stars above shimmered. Far across the void, in a black station orbiting a silent moon, the Xarneth Watchers received the data. They viewed the footage frame by frame. They watched their soldiers die. They watched one human stand alone against them. And when the high node pulsed in flickering red, a new classification was issued. Species 23. Human. Status. Apex hostile. Back on Mira, the dropship finally arrived. They found Rourke unconscious, half frozen, his blood dried into the ground like ink. When he woke, they told him the war might change now. That Earth would listen. That new tactics would form. That humanity had hope. He said nothing. Just stared through them, jaw clenched, haunted. He had faced extinction and made it blink. As they lifted off, leaving the ruins of Mira below, no one said what they were all thinking. No one survived the Reapers until they met a human